19th, Friday. We're dangerously close to the weekend. All right, roll call, please.
Roll call, Legislative Day 22, Friday, March 19th. Anderson? Here. Baldwin? Here. Lightman? Here. Boner?
Here.
Bouchard? Here. Case?
Present.
Cooper?
Here.
Driscoll?
Here.
Ellis? French?
Here.
Murphy? Guru?
Here.
Hicks?
Here.
Hutchings?
Here.
James?
Here.
Kinsky?
Here.
Cole?
Present.
Cost? Landon? McEwen?
Here.
Nethercott? Pappas? Perkins? Perkins?
Here.
Rothfuss?
Here.
Salazar? Schuler? Scott?
Here.
Steinmetz? Wasserberger? Nethercott? Cost?
Here.
Wasserberger excused. President Dockstader.
Here.
29 present, 1 excused.
Prayer by Father Collins.
Lord Jesus Christ, Almighty, all merciful Lord, we bow our heads in thanksgiving to you for the wealth of blessings, both seen and unseen, that you give to us, the people of Wyoming, in both times of abundance and need. Humbly, we beseech you, Lord, to remember in kindness all of our fellow Wyomingites and our fellow Americans who in all times have offered to you and continue to offer you their lives in defense of this country and their families, their neighbors, and the sacred precepts of liberty and justice upon which our country is founded. We beseech you, Lord, to bless the work of these senators and all the delegates of our legislature who have come together to carry forward the work of our democratic republic and its institutions. Remember now your servants, Governor Gordon, both houses of our legislature, those present and those absent with good cause, the staff that make it possible, and especially the people of Wyoming. Give at all times to our senators and our other legislators wisdom from above, dedication to your justice and righteousness, a clear knowledge of the truth and the willingness to stand by it, willingness to listen, willingness to do that which is good and right, rather than which is easy and profitable to self. And above all else, give to them love for our state, our nation, and its people, and both friend and foe alike, in order that we may enjoy enduring freedom and the grace that only comes through doing that which is good. Guide them to fulfill the duties of their office always in a way pleasing to you, for the good of our nation and our state, and for the peace and happiness of the world, and for the glory of your holy name. For alone is yours the dominion, the power, and the glory of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, both now and forever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen.
Amen.
Senator French, would you lead us in the pledge?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning.
Reading correction approval of the journal. Will the reading clerk please read the journal committee report?
Mr. President, your journal committee reports that the journal of March 18, 2021 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Senator Kolb, chairman.
Any objections? There being none, the report is adopted. We want to take a moment, and did we lose our good father? Good father, could you please come up? Father Collins, we want to thank you for joining us after a very unsettled weather condition out there, and I know that delayed your appearance and your help and your prayers on the Senate floor, but we do appreciate it very much. We appreciate you joining us. and being part of the Senate and getting us off to the right start every day. I'd like to present you with a coin, the Wyoming State Legislature, and this mic could be available if you'd like to say a couple words as you leave. Thank you, Father. Appreciate it.
I have an indoor speaking voice. Thank you all for your service. Thank you for the coin of appreciation. And may God continue to bless your work and the state of Wyoming and the people that you represent, and give you all a long life and many years of health and joy. Amen.
Thank you, Father. Today in Wyoming history, Charles Russell was born today in 1864. The Missouri-born artist would move to Montana at a young age and leave a record of unique and accurate depictions of ranching on the northern plains, more even than Remington. How about that? His paintings leave us with an accurate record of early ranching in Wyoming, in addition to Montana and Alberta. A quote for the day: "A day without laughter is a day wasted." Charlie Chaplin. Session status. Today is the last day for bills to be reported out of committee in the House of Origin. Monday is the last day for Committee of the Whole in House of Origin. Tuesday is the last day for second reading on bills in House of Origin. Oh, Senator Pappas, go ahead, sir.
Yes, could I have the privilege of the floor, please?
Please do.
I just wanted to introduce a young woman up in the balcony that accompanied her father today, Father Collins' daughter, Michaela Collins. She's an 8th grader at McCormick Junior High.
Welcome, Michaela. Appreciate you joining your father. Messages from the House.
From the House of Representatives, March 18, 2021. Mr. President, the following bills, the House adopted the Committee of the Whole report, failing them by the votes indicated. House Bill number 211, I beg your pardon, message number 211, House Bill number 228, Highway Closure Violation Amendment. Ayes 24, noes 34, excused 2. The bill has been indefinitely postponed. Message number 212, House Bill number 132, Casper State Office Building naming. Ayes 14, noes 46. The bill has been indefinitely postponed. Signed, Wendy Harding, House Chief Clerk.
Thank you. House bills on first reading and introduction. House Bill 109, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 109, Local Health Officers Education Requirements, an act relating to health officers, sponsored by Representative Hunt. Passed the House, ayes 60.
House Bill 109 is assigned to Committee number 10, Labor Health. House Bill 151, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 151, Rolling Stock Exemption Sunset Extension, an act relating to taxation, sponsored by Representative Henderson. Passed the House, ayes 34, noes 24.
House Bill 151 is assigned to Committee number 3, Revenue. Reports from standing committees.
March 18, 2021. Mr. President, your committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom is referred House Bill 7, engrossed, Air Ambulance Membership Organizations Regulation, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Boner, Case, Driscoll, Nethercott, and Scott. Senator Driscoll, Chairman. March 19, 2021, Mr. President, Committee number 4, Education, to whom is referred House Bill 57, engrossed, Advance Enrollment. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Ellis, Rothfuss, Salazar, and Scott. Senator Scott, Chairman. March 18, 2021, Mr. President, Committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred Senate File 145, Election Runoffs, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Guru, Hicks, Kinski, and Steinmetz. No, Senator Perkins. Senator Perkins, Chairman.
Bills on second reading. Senate File 78, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 78, Real Estate Appraisers Continuing Education.
There are no amendments. Senate File 78, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 118.
Senate File
Second
118.
reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 118, Federal Emergency COVID-19 Relief Funding.
Senate File 118, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 126, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 126, Real Estate Subdivisions Easement Requirements.
Senate File 126, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 142, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 142, Prohibition on Private Funds for Conducting Elections.
Senate File 142, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Folks, we're going to proceed into these third readings. We are anticipating a visit from Senator Lummus, but I think at this point we'll just proceed into our third readings consent list. Bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do you have a consent list?
Mr. President, we do have a consent list. I move third reading consent list, which is as follows. Senate File 49, deferral of criminal sentence amendments. Senate File 66, Slayer rule applied to joint ownership. Senate File 68, absenteeism in public schools. Senate File 90, hemp prohibitions and requirements. Senate File 111, School of Energy Resources budget submittal. Senate File 133, prohibiting abortive and chemical abortions. Senate File 136, required Public Service Commission considerations. Senate File 152, connection of utility services.
Would anyone like any of these bills removed from the consent list? Having been read three separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Senate File 49, deferral of criminal sentence amendments. Senate File 66, Slayer rule applied to joint ownership. Senate File 68, absenteeism in public schools. Senate File 90, hemp prohibitions and requirements. Senate File 111, School of Energy Resources budget submittal. Senate File 113, prohibiting abortifacients and chemical abortions. Rereading for the record, Senate File 111, School of Energy Resources budget submittal. Senate File 133, prohibiting abortifacients and chemical abortions. Senate File 136, required Public Service Commission considerations. Senate File 152, connection of utility services. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Roll call on the consent list. Anderson. Baldwin. Whitman. Boner.
Aye.
Bouchard. Case. Cooper. Driscoll.
Aye.
Ellis. French. Murphy. Guru. Hicks. Hutchings. James.
Aye.
Kinsky. Cole. Cost. Landon. McEwen. Nethercott. Pappas.
Aye.
Perkins. Rothfuss. Salazar. Schuler. Scott. Steinmetz. Wasserberger. Excused. President Dockstader. On the consent list, 29 aye, 1 excused. Senate File 49, are there any changes? Beitman? Aye to no. Hutchings, aye to no. French? Aye to no. Closing vote. Oh, Steinmetz, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 49, 25 aye, 4 no, 1 excused. Senate File 66, are there any changes?
Case I to know.
Case I to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 66, 28 aye, 1 no, 1 excused. Senate File 68, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 68, 29 aye, 1 excused. Senate File 90, are there any changes? Beitman? Aye to no. Rothfuss? Aye to no. Case?
I to know.
Aye to no. Anderson?
I to know.
Aye to no. Bouchard? Aye to no. Furphy? Aye to no. Schuler? Aye to no. McEwen? Aye to no.
James now.
James? Aye to no. Baldwin? Aye to no. French? Aye to no. Nethercott? Aye to no. Salazar? Aye to no. Cooper? Aye to no. Ellis? Aye to no. Kolb? Aye to no.
Perkins, aye to no.
Perkins? Aye to no. Hicks? Aye to no. Landon? No. Dockstetter? No. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 90, 9 aye, 20 no, 1 excused. Senate File 111, are there any changes? Case no. Rothfuss?
I to know.
No. Closing vote.
Perkins, no.
Perkins, no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 111, 26 aye, 3 no, 1 excused. Senate File 133, are there any changes? Case?
Case I to know.
Aye to no.
Guru, I don't know.
Guru, aye to no. Rothfuss?
I to know.
Aye to no. Scott, no. Landon, no.
Perkins, no.
Perkins, no. Baldwin, no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 133, 27 aye, 7 no, 1 excused.
I heard a lot of extra votes.
22 aye, 7 no, 1 excused. Okay. Thank you.
I like the first one.
Senate File 136, are there any changes?
Owner, I don't know.
Case I to no, Boner I to no, Rothfuss I to no, Ellis I to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 136, 25 aye, 4 no, 1 excused. Senate File 152, are there any changes? Rothfuss I to no. Case, no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 152, 27 aye, 2 no, 1 excused.
Senator Perkins.
Mr. President, may I have privilege of the floor to explain a vote on the consent list that I made?
Please do.
Thank you. As in tradition with our custom, I voted no on Senate File 133 prohibiting abortifacients and chemical abortions for the reason that ultimately we already have a statute that covers abortions. It covers abortions. It doesn't distinguish between surgical abortions and chemical abortions. The penalties are actually higher, but it does recognize the viability issue and the viability, which I think is while we may not agree with the constitutional interpretation of the Supreme Court of the United States, nevertheless, it has interpreted that. And this bill directly infringes upon that constitutional pronouncement has been determined by the United States Supreme Court, in that it does not require viability with respect to the punishment of this crime. In addition, Mr. President, it also creates two crimes, a crime that if quite frankly, if an abortion, whether chemical or surgical, is committed in this state, it's now punishable under the existing law. But if it's a chemical abortion, it may now be punished under this law. It makes no sense to me when the end result is the same. And in fact, chemical abortions are proven to be oftentimes more safe for the expectant woman. It makes no sense to me that we would do that and differentiate between those two procedures, one that is particularly more safe than the other, and treat them differently under the law, particularly with respect to criminal law. And in fact, in my discussions with LSO, it's very possible that healthcare provider could be charged with both crimes for the same act. And for those reasons, that's why I voted no. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too was going to ask for privilege of the floor to explain a vote on Senate File 133, which we considered this week and just voted through the Senate. Fellow senators, unfortunately, every week or two in my hometown, in the emergency room, there are arrivals at that door of women of all ages who have been the victims of crimes, rape and other forms of violence, incest. And one of the things that is pretty commonplace from each of those victims is to request the ability to make sure that they are not pregnant from a violent act. Unfortunately, the bill that we just passed wipes out the ability to for families to have that conversation with their doctor. I can't imagine that we would want to saddle a woman with that sort of tragedy for the rest of their lives, but that's what this bill does. And Mr. President, that's why I cannot support Senate File 133. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Steinmetz,
Thank you, Mr. President. Privilege of the floor.
please do.
Fellow members, you know that we will be presenting the House Bill number 1 summary today. And I just wanted to let you know that there are new sheets up on the front table for your reading pleasure to review maybe before we get to that bill. So I wanted to alert you ahead of time. Yesterday, you had a copy that was missing a page. And so we wanted to make sure and get that out to your desks today. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. So folks, what we're going to do here is announce this third reading consent list vote, and then we're going to break for just a moment after that to acknowledge our United States Senator. So at this point, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 49, deferral of criminal sentence amendments, Senate File 66, Slayer rule applied to joint ownership, Senate File 68, absenteeism in public schools, Senate File 111, School of Energy Resources budget submittal, Senate File 133, prohibiting abortifacients and chemical abortions. Senate File 136, required Public Service Commission considerations. And Senate File 152, connection of utility services, have passed the Senate. Senate File 90, hemp prohibitions and requirements, having failed to receive the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 90 has failed to pass the Senate. So we're going to take a break now just for a moment, folks, and welcome someone very important to our lives throughout the state, and of course, very familiar in the public service arena of Wyoming. And with that, we'd invite Senator Lummus onto the floor. She is. I'm going to read this introduction while she's doing some personal greetings there, and everybody listen up real close here. It's with great honor and privilege to welcome back Senator Cynthia Lummus to the Wyoming Legislature. She was sworn into the United States Senate on January 3rd, 2021, becoming the first woman to serve as United States Senator from the great state of Wyoming. Prior to being elected to the U.S. Senate, she served 8 years in the U.S. Congress, 14 years in the Wyoming Legislature, and 8 years as the Wyoming State Treasurer. Note that when I talk about public service here. She is currently a member of the Environmental and Public Works Committee, Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, the Banking, Housing, and Urban Development Committee. Please help me in welcoming home United States Senator Cynthia Lummus. Senator Lummus, please come forward.
Well, this is a very special day for me. Mr. President, may I have the privilege of the floor?
Please do.
Well, Mr. President, members of the Senate, I feel so at home here. I can't wipe the smile off my face because it's so wonderful to see you and to have the privilege of addressing you about how much I admire what you have done. You know, when you serve here, sometimes you take for granted that you're going through the motions and you don't know whether what you do is significant in the lives of people of Wyoming every day. And I can tell you, the longer that I watch what you do and watch it now from afar and what is happening in Washington, the more I admire and respect the fact that you are leading and guiding this state because you are the stewards of this place. You love it. You would not do what you're doing if you didn't want the people of Wyoming to forever have a solid foundation going forward. So when you hand it off to the next group of senators, they will look back at your work and say they gave us something to build on. And indeed you have, and indeed you are. You know, I guess I respect your work so much, so I stole a bunch of your people. And some of them are with me here today. Please welcome our state director, your old Senate buddy, Leland Christensen. If you need anything from our office, pick up the phone and call Leland. And we work so closely together, and he is obviously your eyes and ears and mine as well here in Wyoming. I also want to introduce a person that I actually did steal from you, former LSO attorney and banking commission attorney, Chris Land. You know, the work you did on financial innovation is so significant. There's nothing that compares to it in the entire nation, including what the federal government has done. And Chris's body of knowledge, coupled with the opportunity that I have to pick up the phone and get to know people that can assist in having the charters approved that went through the special purpose depository institution process that you all created, that allows Bitcoin and other distributed ledger and blockchain technologies to advance. I can't even describe how significant the work that you did here is on a national basis. So Chris and I have been on the phone with absolutely the alphabet soup of federal regulators, the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, the CFTC, and the list goes on and on. We have been working to try to have the charters approved that have already been through the process. You've got 3 more in the pipeline. And that puts us out in front. And the rules that were drafted in the banking division have become sort of the baseline national standard for policy that even the US Treasury has said, man, I can't think of how we could improve upon this. This is your work. This is vision. I was thinking earlier with Leland about how your Senate President, Dockstetter, had brought to your attention a number of years ago legislation involving flying cars. I can tell you that is the kind of innovative, foresighted thinking that I had the opportunity to visit with Jim Bridenstine about this week. Interestingly, I ended up being the ranking member on a subcommittee on science and space. And so I called my old friend, Jim Bridenstine, who served as President Trump's director of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. He and I had dinner this week. And President Dockstetter, your ideas were the kind of things we were discussing, bringing them to mainstream, commercializing. So the innovations that are being discussed in this body are now going mainstream, and it's because of you. You know, I was a freshman in the Wyoming Legislature in 1979 with Senator Scott. We were freshmen together, and I looked, Charlie, at how much has been accomplished over these many years since you and I were freshman House members together. And Wyoming has served itself well in so many ways, in fiscal responsibility, in the investment of the permanent funds, and now the ability that we need to draw on the interest on those funds to serve the state well, all created back in the 1970s when you and I were young people. And these ideas will continue to serve you well. And they're models for Congress. States are centers of innovation. You're the innovators. So I encourage you to reach and think big. These big ideas actually percolate up. And I am proud to say I'm a former member of the Wyoming Legislature. God bless your work. God bless your service. And God bless our beloved state of Wyoming. Thank you for allowing me to interrupt your third reading.
On behalf of the Wyoming Legislature, we thank you for your service to Wyoming and the United States Senate. Takes somebody pretty special to interrupt third readings. That'd be Senator Lummus. Thank you, Senator. Continuing with bills on third reading. Senate File 67, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 67, repeal gun-free zones and preemption amendments sponsored by Senator Driscoll, an act relating to concealed weapons.
There is an amendment. Read in the amendment, please.
Senate File 67, third reading amendment number 1, corrected copy, page 1, line 4, after.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 67 and ask for your favorable consideration. Good senators, what this amendment does is it cleans up some language in the bill that needs to be corrected. They are technical corrections. And as we have discussed before, there is a challenge in our laws associated with patchwork regulations that provide, I think, confusing frameworks for the good people of Wyoming and their Second Amendment rights. So as you can see, we add the word ammunition. So not only should the state be regulating and providing control over that, it's also ammunition as well. It's not particularly very exciting, but certainly important. We provide clarification to who actually can carry concealed into a school with this bill, and it's a Wyoming concealed carry permit owner, providing those clarifications consistent with federal law and making sure there are no gaps there. So there are no unintended consequences for Wyoming concealed carry permit holders or others who may think, and allowing for Wyoming, who has reciprocity with other states, can also do the same. So not taking away any opportunities there, just providing some clarification to the law to make sure it's crystal clear for everyone. Then there is some ambiguity in the law as into this bill as to its application to government buildings. And so it's neither clear if you can or if you can't, and I'm not sure if that's the intention, but those ambiguous intentions can no longer be tolerated because we are exposing people to violations of these particular laws, and that's just not acceptable. And so we just need to deal with it. And so as a result of that ambiguity, the particular proposal is to require the building commission to establish rulemaking associated with that ambiguity. And so it's corrections to the bill, and I would stand for questions and ask for your favorable consideration.
Discussion on the amendment. Let's go over to Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. President. I worry about this amendment because rulemaking means that bureaucrats will be making rules here. So, I mean, if we have some things that we have to do in this bill, that would be up to us to make those changes and laws and things that have to be done that are statute. We kind of already have a little bit of a problem with the building commission right now because they have set rules where you can or can't carry now. And there is nowhere in the law where they can do that. So unless we're going to rein in the building commission on how they set those rules that they have already set in place, then I'm concerned that right now we're actually adding to their power instead of taking away.
Further discussion. Let's go back to Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. And it's always an interesting question to determine whether or not and how far the executive branch will go in using their administrative powers. However, the simple fact of the matter is they have to have some ability to have rules to execute the law, and ultimately the regulations are bound to be within the guidelines, within the parameter set. There's a general prohibition, and those regulations can be struck down and challenged if they exceed the guidance and the parameters set forth in the law. But the other side of it is just a practical matter. If you have someone who comes up and they have that, there needs to be some procedures put in place about how they administer this program. For example, it's, under this program, you have to be a concealed carry permit holder. If you're not if you're carrying concealed, but you're not a concealed permit holder, how do they deal with that? What is their instruction? What information and what direction do they give to those who are charged with enforcing the parameters that we've established within this law? And you just have, if you can't just say do it and then hope for the best. You have to give these folks the ability to, within reason and within the guidelines set by the statute, establish common sense rules. And we have the process, we have the ability to review those rules as they come out. And it's easy enough to do. They're posted when they come out. They're usually temporary rules that are then later gone through or done by permanent rules. There's also hearings with respect and opportunity. There's due process with respect to examining these regulations and rules as they come out. But to give them this law that doesn't let anybody do it, but concealed carry permit holders carry, you have to have some ability to enforce and provide instruction and procedures about how this is enforced and how it's carried out. And those who are not within the law, how they're dealt with. Not by crime, but just procedures of how, whether or not they're removed, what the procedure is to ask them to leave the premises, whether someone who doesn't come within the parameters of the law is asked to surrender their firearm or leave. However they do that, they've got to be able to figure out how to do that. And so I would urge you to support this amendment. Thank you.
We're on the amendment. Senator Bouchard, let's go to you first, and then we'll come back to Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It all sounds good at first blush. But when you look at what they're doing now, if you go to, let's say, the museum, there's a no gun sign. Where does it end? We're actually going to give more power to do these things under the Building Commission. They're already doing them. So I think we're taking a good gun bill and we're using it as a vehicle to put some trinkets on it that actually that go in the wrong direction. It's happening now. We can't, I see a couple of nods over there, but it's happening now. The Building Commission has power. They're already doing it. They're doing it across the state. That's not what this bill is about. It's not about saying, hey, let's make more gun-free zones.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was trying to get ready. On the amendment, I think it's line 11, there is a deletion on page 3. I'd like to know if you could, the bringer of the amendment can clarify that a little bit for me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're on the third reading amendment.
Yes, sir.
Number 1 to Senate File 67. Any further questions or comments before I go to the sponsor? Senator Nethercat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think for clarification, it would be helpful. Oh, sorry. I think there's one more question. If I could.
Senator McEwen, let's go to you first, and then we'll come to the sponsor of the amendment. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question on section 4. As I read it, does that give the Building Commission the ability to say this is a gun-free zone? You can't bring a gun in here in this building? Is that what it's aimed at?
Thank you, Senator. Now, Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bill, as currently written, does not make the government buildings gun-free. You have to read the technical details. We're fixing that. Let me make that clear. As the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, I received communications from big lawyers who reviewed the bill and provided particular recommendations. Those recommendations were provided by LSO that result in this amendment. Specifically, the concerns are as follows. As the current reading of the bill without the amendment. Possession of a weapon at the state capitol building and in any buildings under the jurisdiction of the State Building Commission is currently prohibited by regulation. The new statute in the bill, 68105, would allow carrying permitless and with the permit at any meeting of the legislature or a committee thereof. The assumption would usually be that the new section overrides the regulation, right? That'd be the assumption. But the new 68105 states page 3, line 3, that nothing in that section authorizes carrying that is otherwise prohibited by the good senator from Laramie County, 68104 subsection T. That's being deleted, page 3, line 3, that line 3 piece, including subparagraph Romanet 11. That subsection currently and under the bill preserves as prohibited places any place where the carrying of firearms is prohibited by federal law or regulation or state law. Do you want me to read that again? Yeah, okay. So, regulation currently prohibits the carrying of firearms in the state capitol and other legislative meetings. The bill, as found in the section in the bill, 68105, would allow open carry, concealed carry, carrying whatever at any meeting of the legislature or a committee thereof. So the assumption is, and you're thinking of the reading of the bill, is that that would eliminate that regulatory requirement, right? That the statute overrides regulation. That assumption is false because the statute, as found in subsection T, actually says our statutes say a regulation can trump statute if there is no prohibited place. That eliminates that. We're making it stronger. We're clearly saying it. So let me read it again. The assumption would usually be that the new section overrides the regulation, but the new 68105 states, page 3, line 3, that nothing in that section authorizes carrying that is otherwise prohibited by 68104T. So when we look at 68104T, that subsection preserves as prohibited places any place where the carrying of firearms is prohibited by federal law or regulation or state law. Given this language, it's not clear whether carrying at a meeting of the legislature held at the state capitol is lawful. We're going to fix it. So the good gun owners of Wyoming who are carrying and intend to carry here can do so lawfully. That's what the amendment does. I ask for your favorable consideration.
I'm going to stand at ease and allow the president to take his chair, and he can take us to a vote on the third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 67.
Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 67. Are you ready for the question? Question being called. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Amendment has passed. Back on the bill. Ready for a question on the bill or further debate? Question on the bill. Reading clerk, call the roll.
Roll call on Senate File 67. Anderson? No. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner?
Aye.
Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. James?
Aye.
Aye. Kinsky? Aye. Cole? Aye. Cost? No. Landon? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? No. Perkins? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger excused. President Dockstader? Aye. Anderson, no to aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 67, 25 aye, 4 no, 1 excused.
Senate File 67, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elected to the Senate, Senate File 67 has passed the Senate. Senate File 73, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 33, tolling authority for I-80, sponsored by Senator Case, an act relating to highways.
There is an amendment. Read in the amendment.
Senate File 73, third reading amendment number 1, page 6, line 2 after.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to withdraw third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 73.
Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 73 has been withdrawn. Back on the bill. Senate File 73, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elected to the Senate, Senate File 73. Excuse me, ready for the question. Senate File 73, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, call the roll.
Roll call, Senate File 73. Anderson? Aye. Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? No. Boner?
Aye.
Aye. Bouchard? No. Case? Aye. Cooper?
Aye.
Aye. Driscoll? No. Ellis? No. French? No. Murphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? No. James?
No.
No. Kinsky?
Aye.
Aye. Cole?
No.
No. Cost?
Aye.
Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen?
No.
No. Nethercott? No. Pappas? Aye. Perkins? Aye. Rothbus? Aye. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz?
No.
No. Wasserberger excused. President Dockstader? No. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. Senate File 73, 16 aye, 13 no, 1 excused.
Senate File 73, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 73 has passed the Senate. Senate File 92, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 92, Public Hospitals Out of County Operations, sponsored by Senator Case, an act relating to publicly funded hospitals.
There is an amendment. Read in the amendment, please.
Senate File 92, third reading amendment number 1, page 2, line 16 after.
Senator Gru.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move committee, third reading amendment number 1 and ask for your favorable consideration. Good members of the 66th, I rise with this amendment. This bill has kind of been troubling all the way through for me. It's we've been asked by our hospitals to pass a certificate of need bill to try to protect them from people who come in and as the good bringer of this bill said, skim the cream off the top. We haven't done it. And the message has been received by our hospitals. And so they've kind of just said, well, if you can't beat them, join them. And hospitals are moving around the state and opening up clinics and kind of doing the same thing. Consumers are getting choices. Consumers are getting the opportunity to have healthcare in places maybe where they didn't have it or where they were underserved. That having been said, I think we need to hit a reset on all of this and try to have a bigger conversation. That's why I bring this amendment. What this amendment does is simply grandfather those on the tax rolls are taking tax exemption now, but then ask this group in the larger sense to let's address this in a more holistic way, to try to find ways that we can provide better service, protect our hospitals, and move forward. So I urge you to vote yes on this amendment today, and I urge you all to take up that fight later as we move forward to try to really help people in Wyoming, to really try to to try to get better health care and get at some of these nagging questions that have plagued us. I urge your support on the amendment. Thank you. Mr. President.
Questions or discussion for the sponsor, Senator Case?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would ask you to resist this amendment. Mr. President, this is about hospitals that have facilities outside of their tax district. Why should anyone be expected to be entitled to a tax-free status outside of the district that their voters have granted them the tax-free status? This is a hospital that operates in another county, in a county where there's competing private entities. A hospital that doesn't provide the full range of services, Mr. President, but only provides the limited, most lucrative services, which hurts the bottom line and hurts the ability of other facilities to exist. Waiting an entire year to implement this is certainly would be bad policy, Mr. President. I'd ask you to defeat the amendment.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you. I have some questions on this amendment and for the sponsor of the bill. So in many instances, I think you have some hospitals, like the one, mine in particular, not necessarily a county hospital, it's a nonprofit, but it has opened up clinics in other counties, oftentimes provide services that aren't available in that county. And so they provide that. And so I'm just, as this works, I mean, ultimately those services oftentimes probably provided, oftentimes probably the fact that they weren't taxed, or the facilities, if there's physical facilities, aren't taxed in that other county, may have been a significant consideration in the business model that already existed. And so this bill, without this amendment, my question would be, is this bill allow them all of a sudden for commissioners to simply say, well, they're here, if we can go ahead and tax them, we can get some additional revenue out of them, because what are they going to do? Pick up and leave? They might, but that's always a risk. There's already a significant amount of sunk costs. And also, with the specialty care that's provided in other places, it does that it is part of a business model. But all these things go into the business model as you figure out whether or not you can sustain for a break even or even a surplus of treatment in a facility. So it goes all, and this changes that business model. And so I think it does. And so I'd really appreciate knowing how this amendment would affect that, and particularly in light of the bill with this amendment and without the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion? Let's go to you, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for the amendment, and I'm not sure in the long run, to be honest, if the amendment is the appropriate final solution to the concerns that are expressed about this legislation. I get the justification for this legislation. It does make sense to me, but it's significant. It's a pretty non-trivial piece of legislation that has significant implications to any healthcare facility operating outside of their hospital district. So we're basically changing a business model midway for any existing or operating entity without doing an interim study, without finding out the details, without knowing all the answers to the good senator from Retona County. And how much money does this mean? How significant is it for a business model? I don't know the answers to that. And honestly, I can't support the bill not knowing that information without an amendment like this, which puts a little grandfather clause in place. Again, that's not to say that knowing all of that information, I wouldn't support it. I don't know. It might be perfectly reasonable to adopt the bill and retroactively apply it. It might not. But that's been my concern, honestly, with the discussion on this legislation since we've been looking at it. Isn't the underlying intent, which seems perfectly fair and reasonable, but the practical implications of just implementing it. So, Mr. President, for me, this amendment makes it safe, makes it a bill that I can clearly support. And then I'd be very comfortable certainly trying to learn more about it over the next year, maybe having it as an interim study for a committee that can investigate and understand this better, come back to us with detailed numbers, the finances, how much of an effect it has, how often this is playing out, and get us some hard data. And then maybe we reverse this amendment later and kind of put everyone on notice to contemplate it. But Mr. President, to me, this is a judicious amendment that allows me to vote for the legislation, allows us to investigate further without actually just throwing a wrench into the gears of an existing operation when I don't know whether or not that's going to happen, Mr. President. So on and for the amendment, I think it's a good way to proceed judiciously.
Further discussion? Back, Senator Case.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I think it's a very good question as to what would happen in a lot of counties around our state if this bill goes into effect. I think county commissioners have a genuine desire to see their citizens have good health care. And where facilities and services are lacking, I think they would genuinely seek and encourage using this tax exemption tool, which makes it perfectly clear that they can do that. So I think we don't have to worry about counties that are underserved that are seeking facilities to come in. My good colleagues, there are several former county commissioners on this floor. You think about how this would happen if you were at a county commissioner meeting and they came across your desk to provide services that don't exist in your county and that would provide needed benefits to people. I think it'd be pretty clear that you'd want to grant the tax exemption. What about the other situation? You know, healthcare is kind of messed up in a lot of ways. It can be a little bit overly competitive sometimes. And as you get bigger places, some of which are tax supported in their home counties, reaching out to in their largeness, to maybe unwillingly or unwilling from the standpoint of the receiving county, take business away from facilities that already exist. You know, that's a thing. It's a different situation. That's where the county commissioners can decide. I support the bill. Ask you to defeat the amendment.
The discussion before we go back to the sponsors, Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. President. Talk about the business model first. I think that sometimes we overcomplicate things here just a titch. I think in the case of a lot of these hospitals, what happens is this: people come from a community and they come to the main hospital in a larger town. They get the goods and services that that hospital provides, and on their way out the door, they say, "Boy, sure would be nice if I didn't have to drive 100 miles to have this service. It'd be great if I had this service in my own town." The hospital hears that, and the board trying to do their, due diligence and say, "Boy, we seem to have a demand in a community just over the hill or around the lake or on the other side of the river that wants to have these services." And they do. They put together a business plan and they say, "Well, we're tax exempt, and so we can do this, and this is our model, and here we go." Like I say, I think it's happening more around the state than we realize. I'm not saying it's correct. I'm just saying that they're out there working that business model. It's a business decision. In a time when, due to COVID-19, as we all know, hospitals are really kind of up against it. People aren't going in for elective surgeries. We know that in our own state health insurance model. A year ago, they were $20 million underwater. Today, they're $60 million above. Do we think they're doing it better? We don't know. We think what's happened is a lot of state employees haven't gone in for elective surgery. Then they're going to go in and they're going to hit the hospitals, and that money's going to evaporate. But it's the same model. The hospitals are trying to do their best to stay open. This is a result. I urge you to support this. But I also urge you then we have to take the next step, as our earlier speaker said, that we've got to be bold and we've got to be visionary. We've got to work hard, and there are other bills coming to try to really tackle healthcare. And let's do it in a global way. But let's pass this amendment first, grandfather these businesses that have done this, and then let's move forward. On and for the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Ready for the question? Question on third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 92. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay.
No.
Ayes have it, unless there's a division. Division. All those in favor say aye. Stand.
Aye.
Do both so I make sure. Senator James, are you there?
I think he's a yes.
Senator James, are you an aye or a nay? Give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. He's a nay. 13 ayes, 15 noes. Amendment has failed. We're back on the bill. Ready for the question? Senate File 92. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, call the roll.
Senate File 92, roll call. Anderson?
Aye.
Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? No. Boner?
No.
No. Bouchard? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Driscoll? No. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Murphy? No. Guru?
No.
No. Hicks? No. Hutchings? Aye. James?
Aye.
Aye. Kinsky?
Aye.
Aye. Cole?
No.
No. Cost?
No.
No. Landon? No. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? No. Pappas?
No.
No. Perkins?
No.
No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? No. Steinmetz? No. Wasserberger, excuse. President Dockstader? No. Closing vote? Closing vote closed. Senate File 92, 12 aye, 17 no, 1 excused.
Senate File 92 having received the affirmative vote of the majority, Senate File 92 having failed to receive the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 92 has failed to pass the Senate. Senate Joint Resolution number 4, third reading of the joint resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 4, School Capital Construction Constitutional Amendment, sponsored by Senator Scott. A joint resolution proposing to amend the Wyoming Constitution to transfer responsibility to construct school facilities to school districts by providing mandatory and optional state funding mechanisms.
Discussion on the resolution. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on and against the constitutional amendment, again, not because I disapprove of the intent and the purpose and wish it succeeded at achieving the intent and purpose, but because it's just not there yet. And I don't think it's going to get there. If you read the ballot statement is very subjective. It's not factually based. Take a quick read through of that, and no work was done to remedy or address that discussion. The approach has a vague implication of having a tax without actually necessarily mentioning that there's a potential tax and then not even quantifying the tax. So we don't really know how much tax will occur if the tax is implemented or how much the state would be picking up. And it's not to say you want to be long-winded in either a ballot statement or in a constitutional amendment, but direct clarity for the Constitution should be there. And then, Mr. President, the final point, and I won't belabor it because we discussed this at length previously, is just the way it works doesn't particularly work in an equitable way. I am confident that if we do pass this, my district would be the district that would benefit the most. So I will take solace and consolation in knowing that if 20 votes come to this and it passes and then the voters support it, we'll just be building after new building in Albany County. So from that standpoint, this will be great. But when I look at it from the broader perspective of someone who served on the school facilities committee for the past decade, who has worked shoulder to shoulder with my colleagues trying to figure out what is in the best interest of the entire state's fleet of schools. This doesn't get there. This doesn't fund our needs. It doesn't address major maintenance, which is half the cost. It doesn't address or remedy those school districts that really just won't pass a ballot measure because they're ever so much more frugal. And it also doesn't address the inequity between those districts that can afford schools and those districts that really can't, because bringing you up to the middle, still not the same thing as being at the top. For all of those reasons, Mr. President, I'm on and against this constitutional amendment proposal.
Further discussions, Senator Scott.
Mr. President, just very briefly. We've got a problem. Our school capital construction system that we've had can no longer work because the principal funding source, which was co-lease bonuses, is gone and is not going to come back. And we all know that. Mr. President, we've got to do something different. This is the best I could come up with because it switches the principal decision making to the voters of the local districts whose taxes will go up if they pass the bond issue. And how much taxes go up and how much we have to pay for equalization is unknown, cannot be known with this system because it will depend on the action of the voters in the various local school districts as they consider whether the proposed facilities in their districts are reasonable or not. And the experience we had of 100+ years, we ran this system since statehood. The voters had a pretty good sense of what was needed and what was not. And the experience was, if it was really needed, they would pass it. If it was gold-plated or not needed, they would not pass it. Did a very rational system. And it's one that's fair because the voters are seeing each side, both the cost and the benefit. So for those reasons, Mr. President, I think we need to put this on the table and see what the rest of the legislature thinks about it. Get the discussion initiated. This may or may not, we don't know, pass this year, Mr. President. But it will put this on the table and maybe encourage others to come up with other solutions too. And then we can see which works. But we've got to get started. And this is the start. And it does have the key principle that if you vote for it, your taxes will go up. So you have, as the saying is, skin in the game. So for those reasons, Mr. President, I urge an aye vote on this.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Ready for the question? Senate Joint Resolution, and I'll note this is a 2/3 majority vote, 20 votes are required. Senate Joint Resolution number 4, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the resolution pass? The chief clerk will call the roll.
Roll call on Senate Joint Resolution number 4. Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Beitman. Aye. Boner.
Aye.
Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Case. Aye. Cooper. No. Driscoll. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Furphy. Aye. Guru. No. Hicks. Aye. Hutchings. No. James.
Aye.
Aye. Kinsky. Aye. Cole. Aye. Cost. No. Landon. No. McEwen. Aye. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Perkins. Aye. Rothfuss. No. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. No. Scott. Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. Wasserberger excused. President Dockstetter.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote to close. Senate Joint Resolution 4, 22 aye, 7 no, 1 excused.
Senate Joint Resolution number 4, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elected to the Senate, Senate Joint Resolution 4 has passed the Senate.
You said a majority of those. I think it needs to be the supermajority of 2/3.
2/3, that'd be 20. We had 22? Yeah. Yes, I see what you're asking for. Just received the 2/3 majority vote. Thank you for that clarification. Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move immediate reconsideration of Senate File 73 and ask the body to vote no.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
No, it's a roll call.
Roll call.
Roll call.
Reconsideration.
Yeah. Please. Go ahead.
While this isn't debatable, I would ask for clarification, immediate reconsideration and asking to vote no. I take that request as a request to vote no on the reconsideration. And I'd like brief clarification, even though it's not debatable.
Let's go to Senator Landon for clarification, but we'll,
Additional,
go ahead.
additional point of order.
Please do.
I think that the motion needs to be having prevailed on the prevailing side.
Correct.
That I seek immediate reconsideration. I don't know that I heard that. And then just for the folks that are in the body, the reconsideration, if you do this, you can't bring this question back up again. So this ends up being a final vote. And so anyway, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you, Mr.
So with those 2 points of advice, Senator Landon, we'll take it back to you.
Mr. President, my apologies. I will restate so that it is done properly. Having voted on the prevailing side, I would move reconsideration of Senate File 73 and ask the body to vote no. And for clarification to my friend from Albany County, yes, that is on the vote for reconsideration. Thank you, Mr. President.
Reconsideration of 73. Senator Case, you want to follow up?
Point of order, just to be painfully obvious. If you vote no on the reconsideration, then there will not be a subsequent vote on the bill. If you vote yes for reconsideration, then we will revote the bill. So the good senator is asking you to vote no on the topic of reconsideration, so the vote that happened before stands.
Roll call.
For reconsideration of Senate File 73, roll call. Anderson? No. Baldwin? No. Beitman? Aye. Boner?
No.
No. Bouchard? No. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? No. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Murphy? No. Guru? No. Hicks? No. Hutchings? Aye. James?
Aye.
Aye. Kinsky? No. Cole? Aye. Cost? No. Landon? No. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? No. Pappas? No. Perkins? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott? No. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger, excuse President Dockstader. Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. For reconsideration, 10 aye, 19 no, 1 excused.
Reconsideration is failed. Continuing with third readings, we're going to go into House Bill 1 now. House Bill 1, third reading of the bill. Reading clerk.
House Bill 1, General Government Appropriations 2, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, an act relating to supplemental appropriations and reduction of existing appropriations for the operation of state government for the operation of the fiscal biennium commencing July 1, 2020 and ending June 30, 2022.
Chairman Perkins, wherever you are. Chairman Perkins, you and your committee would like to explain the non-identical amendments?
Yes, we'd love to do that. If I could, I'd like, Mr. President, with your permission, I'd like to give a few introductory remarks. I'll be referencing the goldenrod, which is sometimes called the profile. We call it the goldenrod oftentimes, just to start there and show you where some of the differences are with respect to the body. And this isn't, with the goldenrod, it doesn't just reflect bills that the budget bill, but it reflects all bills that have appropriations that have at least passed committee of the whole in either house. So what you see is what you look as if you find the goldenrod. Do we not have a goldenrod?
Well,
we don't.
Just
I
be a
thought
little
that this has
patient
been-
here. We're going to round up this goldenrod up front here, Kelly.
All right, well, I'll tell you what, we'll hold those marks for later and we'll just go into the differences in the budget bill. So if you have, we'll be working primarily off this sheet, the summary sheet that you're getting. And again, what we're doing here is we're reviewing House Bill 1. And so these are the amendments that were passed by the House of Representatives to their budget bill. And we will, we'll help identify that for you. And then we'll also try and give you a little bit of a flavor of what the position is on each of these House amendments as compared to what was done in the Senate. And we've divided this up so you don't have to listen to any one of us too long. So if you'll.
All right.
All right.
We'll get everybody back in their seat and it's all yours, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So that first page, it just has all the amendments left on. That's a copy of the actual report. And so we won't be working off that. Like I said, we'll be working off this, what is it? There are these 14 by 16, whatever the size, 17 papers that these are. So I'll go through about the first 2/3 of this page, and then we'll hand off to another member of appropriations. So the way this is kind of structured, you see, if you start up on the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a House amendment. Then you see the next line over sponsor. That's who's sponsor, or at least the initial sponsor listed on the House amendment. You'll see if there was a mere amendment in the Senate. Then you also see in some of these, you'll see that there are some identical. There's one identical. There's several that are related, although they're related somehow to the same subject. Sometimes it's pretty close. Sometimes it's not close at all. It's just subjects to the same subject were broached by amendments in both houses. And then you see the Senate sponsor. Then you'll see in there the agency name, program. You see general fund, federal fund, other fund source. You see if there's full-time changes to the full-time positions. You'll see the pay. This refers to the page number in the, I believe in the budget that was affected on the line number. And so we'll start through there. The very first one, which was House Second Reading Amendment 26, there was a mere amendment in the Senate, which was Senate Third Reading Amendment 1. What this did is this is a mere amendment in both houses that added 3 additional people to the financial accounting function in the Treasurer's office. That was in light of a report that we received about the first week we were in session down here on a report on the Treasurer's office looking for weaknesses and where those need to be shore up. And so this is the first step in trying to shore up the financial accounting processes in the Treasurer's office. That's a mere amendment. So that's not subject to negotiation. That is a done deal between the houses if there is a budget. Then we start into the related, see Second Reading Amendment number 7, which the A stands for adopted. You see that had to do with the geological survey. We had a pretty close, almost not quite, but a mere amendment in the Senate. The Senate cut out the funds and left the language with respect to hydrogen and rare earth minerals. The House passed that mere amendment, if you remember that, in full. So they added one position back to the geological survey plus the $130,000, and then basically had the same language, leaves the same language in that we also had. Next one was third reading amendment number 25. This was, the first two were technical corrections that came out by staff. You see technical correction for inserts used in footnote 2, then a technical correction for grammar. Then you see below it adds a subsection E. The House amendment added a subsection E to have the state auditor transfer amount from the SIP to the general fund that equals the total expenditures of the general fund under subsection A as effective date of this act. Long story short, what that means is the Senate left money in SIPA and the House worked to drain SIPA completely. And that's basically the difference. There is a fund swap there on that. The next item you have down was second reading amendment 39 on the community college, where this was similar in that if you remember, there was many of you might have known that there was a governor's letter that came out asking for the restorations you see there under the general fund line, the 4,840,000, 930,000, that 40, almost 5 million goes to community colleges, that almost 9.1 million goes to the university. The Senate did not pass those types of amendments, but we did. The reason that that's related is, if you remember, we did increase community college funding by $10 million and decreased University of Wyoming funding by $10 million. So that's why they are related. The next item was third reading amendment 23 in the House. That was a budget balancer transfer. And this just goes to make sure that we have on both sides that we have this 113,185 in the budget reserve account when we leave here. And so you remember we went high and the other one went low, and we'll work that out so that we have a balanced budget when we leave. Next one was House third reading amendment 27 was the mineral severance tax diversion. Most of the difference here is the House put a significant part of the 1% severance tax money into reserve accounts, and the Senate put it into into the corpi of the, isn't that Mr. President, is that the plural of corpus, is corpi? I think it is, but anyway. Put it into the corpi of the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund and the Common School Permanent Land Fund. The next one was House Second Reading Amendment 23. We had a very similar one here. The language is a little bit different, but that was $10 million for carbon capture and a carbon to further and help finance a carbon capture and sequestration storage unit associated with a particular coal-fired power plants. Then the next one was Second Reading Amendment 1, and that was a veterans tax exemption that restored $2,034,000, which funds that tax exemption in full. This body brought one in second reading that it defeated in, I think, of an equal amount, and then there was a lesser amount that was brought in a third reading amendment was also defeated in this body. So that was something the House did that the Senate didn't. Then I'll just this is the last one I'm going to do before we hand it off to the good Vice Chairman of Appropriations. The House third reading amendment number 1 provided and took money out of the capital case account and reallocated that if Senate File 150 passed. Based upon our action yesterday, Senate File 150 died on third reading, and so that one is just a nullity. That doesn't really even apply anymore because the condition for that has not occurred and will not occur. So with that, I'll turn it over to the good Senator Steinmetz. Thank you, Mr. President.
All yours, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. And then we would be on House Second Reading Amendment 28, the Nicholas Amendment. That is regard to a governor's letter and positions within the Attorney General's office. It would increase the general fund by $228,000 approximately, and increases 2 FTE positions. Next would be third reading amendment number 4, the Summers Amendment in State Parks and Cultural Resources. This would decrease the general fund by $16,755, but increases $90,052 in the general fund and increases 1 full-time position. Then your next amendment would be third reading amendment number 14 would be the Harshman Amendment in the State Engineer's Office in the Interstate Streams Division. This would take $632,744 of general funds and put that into the Water Development 1 account and charge Water Development 1 for that appropriation. And next would be I would tag team my good senator behind me.
Good Senator Kinsky.
I think she meant me.
We're assuming.
We're hoping. Just if I may, just by way of just a little additional background, if you'd permit me the liberty. For those that are curious, if you want to understand a little bit better, those who've been around a while understand it. The newest or newish, you may want to refer to Joint Rule 14 General Appropriations Bills. This is a different process, but we debated our budget, sent it over there. They debated theirs, sent it over here. And the rules provide that the Appropriations Committee just outlines these things for you. And then afterwards, we immediately go to a joint conference. So this is FYI, but you will have a chance, assuming we come back with a conference committee report, to consider these things. And so when we go into that first committee, it's baseball style arbitration. So if whatever the other side's last offer was and whatever our last offer was, we can come out with those two numbers or something in between, but we can't get outside of that range. And if we go to a free committee, then all bets are off. And I set that groundwork because what I'm going to give you on the amendments that I'm going to cover is what's the dollar range we're between net. And so I'm starting on page 2 of 3. And it's the second box that says H2035 Larson. Then you look over on the far right, and there is a lot of very small font with a lot of very dense numbers. So to make this a little bit easier, I've actually had staff break it out into a separate spreadsheet, and any of you who want a copy of that are more than welcome to it. So I'm going to go down this spreadsheet, which roughly follows the order of the Department of Health amendments and the Department of Family Service amendments that you see there. So first, Department of Health, Unit 460. Originally, we were going to, this was elimination of the state SSI, and we had to back off of that and fund it. Both sides agreed on that. So that one's a done deal. Next is elimination. The governor proposed elimination of dental coverage for adults who meet Medicaid requirements but are not eligible because of age. The Senate backed that recommendation, which was a cut of $325,000 for the second year of the biennium, and the House restored it. So whatever we come out of in conference committee the first time, it's going to be somewhere between zero put back and $325,000 restored. Does that, I hope that makes sense. Okay. Next is eliminate dental coverage for adults who meet Medicaid requirements but are not eligible because of age. The governor recommended eliminating that. It was a $100,000 cut in general fund. The House put back 50,000 of it. That is for the second year of the biennium, and asked the department to come back and ask for it in the next biennium. We kept the cut in. So we will, in committee, we will be talking about somewhere between zero restoration, which is the Senate's position, and $50,000, which is the House's. Next is resetting all developmentally disabled adult waiver participant individualized budget amounts, IBAs, based on assessed level of service. This is the grandfathering clause. The governor's recommendation was everybody who was prior to 2014 should be brought up to current standards. And that saved $3,000,000 $3.5 million was the governor's recommendation in general fund. The House put back about half of the governor's recommended cut of 1.7 million. We did not put anything back. So in committee, we'll be talking about a number between 0 and 1.7 or $1.8 million. Next, on the DD waiver, the governor's proposed budget would freeze the waiting list and no new folks would go on it. The governor's budget saved $1.7 million. We agreed with that. The House put half of it back and again recommended that the department come back and ask for the rest of it in the next budget. So we are $840,000 apart, with us, our position being 0 restoration of cuts and the House restoring $840,000 worth of cuts. Next, again on the DD waiver, the budget that we approved from the governor would eliminate duplication between the comprehensive waiver program and the Medicaid state plan. In other words, under the current methodology, you can get your comprehensive waiver and go out and get some services paid for by Medicaid in addition. The budget that we adopted, the governor recommended, said we're going to eliminate that duplication. That saved $1 million in general fund, and the House restored that. So we are somewhere between 0 and $1 million on that one. Next, I'm going to take these just bang, bang, bang. There's a 6% foster family subsidy payment reduction that we adopted, a 6% reduction of adoption and guardianship payments, 6% group home rate reduction, and a 6% residential treatment rate reduction. The House restored a portion of each of those. It looks like about a quarter, somewhere around a quarter of that. And so we are on one, we are between 0 and $218,000 apart, another between 0 and 211,000, another between 0 and 128,000, another between 0 and 210,000. Next is the Wyoming Home Services Senior Citizens Non-Medicaid Qualified. The governor's step 2 was to cut 2.7 million out of that, and step 3 was to cut 2.7 out of that. That's the entire, that all of that is general fund. And the House put 4.1 million back, restoring the entirety. The Senate put back 1.3 million. So in conference committee, we will be talking about a number of a minimum of 1.3 million to a maximum of 4.1 million. Next, the Children's Mental Health Waiver and Care Management Entity, AKA the wraparound. The governor's step 3 was approximately a $3 million reduction. The House put it back 1.47 for the rest of this year, with a recommendation that they come back and ask for it in next year's budget. We will be debating in conference somewhere between a restoration of 0 and a restoration of $1.47 million. Next is a 2.5% reduction across all provider types. The budget we adopted that the governor recommended saved $11 million in general fund in the step 2 and another $11 million in the step 3. The House put back a goodly portion of that, as did the Senate. So in conference committee, we'll be debating a number of somewhere between 3.1 million and 5.6 million. Next is freeze requests for increased funding for individual budget amounts through the extraordinary care committees for the supports and comprehensive waiver. Again, this is DD. Ultimately, we'll be debating a number somewhere between 0, which is the Senate position, and a restoration of $900,000 in funding.
Well, I don't know if it's a point of order, but go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a point of order either. This is really easy to read and easy to follow, but could you tell us where you are on the page so that we could really easily follow it? It's
The numbers you're talking about aren't on my page, but.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And that's, I
Just-
had staff break it out this way.
Okay, let's make sure,
It's-
the copy I had didn't have the second page, and so make sure you got all 3 pages, Senator.
I've
But,
got
Mr. President, if I may, this is a more detailed sheet. So some of these things are aggregated on the summary sheet that you have. Some of these things are lumped together without an explanation of detail. And so perhaps I'm giving you more detail than you really care to have. It could be too much. I'm happy to make this spreadsheet.
Senator,
available.
I'd like you to continue with the detail, just give them a little heads up once in a while on kind of where you're at, but stay with the detail.
Okay.
Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'd ask the good senator if this is available. I actually have a copy of it. It's ridiculously handy, but I know not everybody does. And if there's an electronic copy, it's very easy to follow along with the good senator's description with this. And I don't know if an electronic one can be sent around quickly or not, but it's
Chairman,
handy.
let's do this, Senator Robbins. Chairman.
Evidently it's being distributed
Okay.
now.
No, not necessarily. Chairman Perkins, what's your desires?
I,
Chairman?
let me do this and maybe we can continue on and we can certainly make this available to anybody who wants to have it. What we're at, Mr. Chairman, if we go to page on the sheet that you have, the program that you have. So where you mostly are is if you go to, if you see House Second Reading Amendment 35, House Second Reading Amendment 9, House Second Reading Amendment so mostly this is tied into House Second Reading Amendment 35 and 9. And so this is inside of all this. There was a similar amendment that was offered to this amendment on this side that was defeated in whole. And so what you see is sometimes referred to the Larson Amendment 230, went back through and restored a significant number of the governor's cuts. And that detail just really isn't anywhere either in the, without looking at these specific sheets. And then what the sheet does is breaks down every one of the items that were either touched by the House appropriation, by the House when they did the Larson Amendment, or in this body because we did some things where, if you remember, we took some money from UW matching grant and put that into DD. We had another significant, we put another significant amount. We put about $12,000 back in the Department of Health. Some of ours were fairly close to that, but when we put it back in about 2 or 3 places, they sprinkled it back through all over the place. And so what we're trying to do is give you this highlight of, not highlight, but actually a detailed description of what those differences are, mostly in the Larson Amendment, and just where we are in a nutshell from where we are on the Larson Amendment and what they passed over here, which was not passed here. And then like I say, we did about 3. We had about 3 amendments that passed, put money back in. And of course, we're talking about this in the context of House amendments. So it's hard to reference back to a Senate amendment. But ultimately, that's what he's doing. He's just giving you a tremendous amount of detail that is not in your narrative on House Second Reading Amendment 35 and House Second Reading Amendment 9.
So let's do this. I'm not sure that we can find that big sheet just yet. We can probably have it sent out, but I think in order to keep the process moving forward, we'll go back to, let's have Senator Steinmetz and then Senator Kinski in that order.
Thank you, Mr. President. So in your inbox, there is a standing committee summary sheet from LSO staff Mary Beth Overstall. It just came in, and that is the sheet that Senator Kinski is working off of. I realize it's a lot to, oh, it's a different one. They've sent out the wrong one. So we will need to have the other
Mary
sheet
Beth,
sent out.
give us another
Yeah,
shot in the background.
Sorry
there.
about that. Thank you for that correction.
Okay, I think we're going to continue at this point. Mary Beth will get us that extra big sheet, but Senator Kinski, just walk us through it. Continue that way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to remember exactly where I was, and I apologize for this. It's probably the House needs a new rule that says you don't put all these things into a single amendment. The 2.5% reduction to the governor, the Senate partially restored, the House fully restored, or the House fully restored for the end of, to the end of the biennium. We are about $2.5 million apart. Let me see, freezing of the Extraordinary Care Committee for DD. We are $900,000 apart with the House. The Wyoming Vaccinates Important People program for private providers. We are $750,000 apart with the House. Eliminating chiropractic as a covered Medicaid benefit. We are $200,000 apart from the House, whereas we were taking the lesser expenditure view. We voted to eliminate state subsidy to Community Juvenile Services Board funding. The House restored all of it and then some. We are $600,000 apart. The page I'm looking at now is being distributed. I should have done that. Salary and reductions to funds for children's special health services, partially restored by the House. We are $225,000 apart. And then finally, restoration of Governor Step 2 reductions for comprehensive waiver services, homemaker, wait list, specialized equipment. The Senate put back a 2.4 million. The House did not. We're 2.4 million apart there. So the sheet that's being distributed should have on the far right-hand column, House/Senate, high and low. And then below that, it says Senate state funds, general fund plus S10, because the House started taking some money out of LISRA. And then House state funds, general fund plus S10. So it's looking at the total dollars. Thank you, Mr. President. And then, so now back to the bigger sheet. The remaining part of my presentation is on page 2 of 3 on the big sheet, H 2010 Connolly. And this is simply saying that the Wyoming Council for Women's Issues is being transferred from the Business Council to the Department of Workforce Services by mutual agreement between the Business Council and DWS. And this says if Business Council has any unexpended funds left, they are to transfer those over to the Department of Workforce Services associated with the Wyoming Council for Women's Issues. And then finally, the Hunt Amendment 2012.01. The SLIB board and the governor's recommendation was to cut $500,000 in noxious weed, invasive weeds on state lands. That was restored by the Hunt Amendment, a one-time appropriation and reinsertion of a footnote saying that it's specifically to address noxious and invasive weeds. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague from the People's Republic of.
Good time to stop. Senator Grew. Thank you, comrades. Mr. President. We'll climb out of the weeds and move on now to House Amendment number 9, the Yin Amendment from Department 67, the University of Wyoming. It's for $4 million. As you read the narrative on the far corner, with your bifocals like I am, you'll notice that there's similarity to an amendment that we did not adopt, which was the Rothos Amendment on our side, but they passed this amendment for $4 million. Next, the House Amendment 26, the Nicholas Amendment from the University of Wyoming, Department 67. This is for $15,500,000 and basically allows, it's a footnote allowing the University of Wyoming to issue revenue bonds for the Bison Run Village apartment for a purchase price not to exceed $15,500. And it specifies the appropriation shall not be included within the university's standard budget. There's an interest savings with that of about $400,000 in that move. And then the last one I have is House Amendment 17, a Stith Amendment from the Department of Corrections Field Services. That's Department 80 for $373,550. That increases the general fund for 6 full-time positions. And if you'll recall, or we have that in a bill that is coming your way. So those are my amendments, and then I will turn it over to my good friend, the man from Bag.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, now we're going to move off of the general side of the budget, and we're going to see how you creatively finance the school side of the budget, which should never be in the budget to begin with. So the next 3 amendments we'll talk about, which is House Amendment 3018. What this amendment does is goes into our school or into our prison account that we've slowly been saving up money over the last decade and transfers $30,500,000 from the prison account into the school capital construction account. So we've moved it from the general fund side of the ledger into the school finance side of the ledger. Next amendment is House Amendment 2022. This increases the maximum balances in the permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund reserve account and the common school permanent land fund reserve account. So let me tell you what it changes it from a spending policy of 150% to 225%. Well, what does that actually mean? So first, let's deal with the raising in the spending policy on the permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund reserve account. The likelihood that we're going to hit the 225% that would result in a tip based on the budget and fiscal staff's analysis is it basically has no impact. We're not going to get there. But here's the important part. So you change the spending policy on the common school permanent land fund reserve account from 150 to 225. The net impact of doing so, based on budget and fiscal's estimate, is somewhere between $37 and $52 million that would normally tip into the corpus. The permanent fund will now be in the reserve account and that will be spent. So it does move somewhere between $36 and $52 million onto the table that will be spent in the reserve account. The next one that we'll go down to is House Third Reading Amendment 24. This goes in there and it reduces the transfer. We had a really banner year in the Excellence in Higher Education Endowment Reserve and that account on investment earnings. And what this does is takes that 10.5 million and reduces that. And then the only thing that now would, what we're going to do is we're going to take $5,645,000 and we'll put that in the endowment fund. So that doesn't go into the corpus anymore. That's going to be spent. So let me just tell you a little bit about the net effect of that. We hire a consultant every year that comes in and they will look at all of our permanent funds, give us some actuarially estimates. And the last one we had on this was updated in 2019. And this didn't include the banner year, but the 20-year actuarially estimate on that count that we get out 20 years is it has a likelihood of 2% of actually meeting the spending policies of what we'd like to. So in effect, what this amendment does is it eats the seed corn. Instead of allowing that to roll into the corpus, it's going to intercept $5.6 million. That then will be on the table for expenditure. Just a little more background on that. In the last 15 years, 3 times the legislature has either had to change or insert additional money in there to make that solvent of all of our permanent funds. This is the least solvent one. That amendment doesn't help to solve that problem, but that's what that does. The second part of that is it goes into the excellence. Let's see here. We changed the spending policy here. This is on the Hathaway Scholarship Program. It changes the spending policy from where it's currently at up to 9%. Same group that does the actuarially soundness on that says currently today, the 20-year projection on that is about 29%, 29.6% actuarially sound. If we go to the 9%, this was actually forecasted in the 2019 analysis done by the consultant. We increased to 9%. It makes that account somewhere around 9% actuarially sound 20 years from now. It just won't meet the objectives of funding those scholarships in the future if we increase that spending policy. That's the effect of that amendment. Mr. Chairman, the last one, before I jump into the last one, so let me give you the net of where we're at based on this. So on the general fund side of the ledger, we're somewhere around $45 million difference between the House. If we combine the education finance side that these amendments rolled in there, and you look at the difference that we had on the one on what we do with the 1% severance tax. So if we look at the diversions and the tips and the changing in the spending policy, we're somewhere around $212 million difference with our colleagues in the House. Real important lesson here, folks. Real important lesson. A lot of times the big money's in the 300 sections and the footnotes. And if you know how to do the spending policies, the tips, the changes, and the diversions, there's a lot of money that can be moved around in a budget that can be done with simple amendments. Mr. Chairman, we get to the last one on House Bill, or on the House 3022, the Gray amendment. That just went in and required a report, which is probably a good thing to look at the effectiveness in the A&I division of all the savings associated with changes and elimination of positions. It'll just give us an idea of what that looks like based on the governor's executive order. Was it effective or not? What was the fiscal impact associated with that? So it just provides for a report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we'll go back to Chairman Perkins.
So, Mr. Chairman,
We have a question before we go back to you.
and I was just going to say, why don't we pause at this moment and take any questions on what we've presented so far?
Good approach. Senator Roths.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this isn't so much as a question, but just a little bit of a pushback on the last few amendments about spending policy. And the only reason for the pushback is that the Senate has a very different philosophy than the House when it comes to spending policy and the reserve accounts. And we've seen that over the last few years. And when we hear discussion about it over here, and when our appropriations committee stands up and talks about it, we actually tend to vilify their ideas a little bit and cast them as being irresponsible. And I'm not saying they're better or worse, honestly. I kind of fall between the two. I see both sides, but I just wanted to present in a little more detail what they're thinking a little bit on their behalf. And then I honestly don't care how it turns out because I don't think it makes much difference. But the way we operate our investments and our endowments is a struggle for us, where the endowments themselves are inviolate. So we can't touch the funds once they get into our permanent funds. So Common School Permanent Land Fund, Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund. When the dollar gets there, you can't mess with those dollars. But we have these spending policies where we want to spend a 4.5% to 5% yield off of those permanent endowments. But as we all know, stock market goes up, stock market goes down, capital gains show up, capital gains don't show up. So the revenue from those capital gains is regrettably not cooperative with us when it comes to a spending policy. So we had to contrive this idea of, well, let's have a reserve account that we can get into. And then once the reserve account fills up to a certain point, it pours over, it goes into the fund. So we can spend this reserve. And so we set it aside, and it's currently set at 150% of the spending policy amount. What does that mean? That means that we have 1.5 times the amount that we expect to spend available to us So in lean times, we can go in and grab it, even if we don't have capital gains. And remember, we don't get to decide when we have capital gains. The treasurer does. And we had a few years back, where even though there were $1 billion of unrealized capital gains sitting in a pile, they weren't realized. So we had insolvencies in some of our funds as a result. The one that the good senator mentioned, the money could have been there, but it just didn't show up. That was the problem. That was why it had to be bailed out, because the timeline didn't show up and we didn't have a reserve that was appropriate to backfill the spending policy amount. So 150% is where we're at right now. It's probably sufficient, but the concept of going to 225% is increasing the amount you have to fill before it pours over into the permanent fund. It doesn't mean you spend it. That's important. It doesn't mean it's being spent. It means you're creating a buffer, a funding buffer, anticipating larger lean times. The trade-off is that we don't invest those funds at the same yield as what goes into the corpus. So it's not a one-sided argument. It's a reasonable discussion. How much do we want in reserve at a low yield versus how much do we want in the permanent fund at a high yield? And there's a trade-off. If we had a zero reserve, we'd make more money, but we'd have challenges with cash flow. If we had it all in reserve, we'd have no problem with cash flow, but we'd struggle massively with yield. Your guess is as good as mine. 150, 225, 175, 183, I don't know. But it's sold. But I just wanted everyone to understand that this is a sensible debate that is two-sided with balanced interests on either side. It's not just a one-sided, they're being ridiculous. And we tend to gloss over, this is ridiculously complicated. I mean, you've all seen the goofy spaghetti charts that we've got here. So, Mr. President, I just wanted to provide a little more background so that our newer folks can understand what these numbers mean, and hopefully that helped. If it didn't help, chat with any of us and ask more questions. But I wanted to provide that little bit of context, Mr. President.
Further discussion? Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate my colleague from Albany County's perspective. But I wanted to ask just specifically about House Amendment 3018 to my good friend from Bags. I'm just, having served on a couple of task forces for our penitentiary and in the corrections area quite a bit of time, and knowing how we have tried to set that aside for, I think primarily we were looking at Torrington. But I'm intrigued that the idea from the other side is to utilize that, I assume, in major maintenance or you know, projects that are in line or whatever. My question is, what was the position of our Senate Appropriations Committee, or was that even discussed before this? And then my second question goes to the good senator from Sheridan County. If you could give us an idea just overall, what is the difference that we have with the other body, specifically in the Department of Health? I know that we passed a couple of fairly minor things. It sounds like they passed quite a few things, and I'm just wondering what that gap is. Thank you.
Just a minute. Should we gather a couple more? Senator Scott, did you have something? Yeah, referencing state prisons. So, do you want to hold that? Hold that, and we're going to go to Senator Scott and collect a few more. Go ahead, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a general comment that doesn't apply to what we've been talking about. So maybe we ought to deal with that first, and then I'll come back.
Very good. Okay. Senator Hicks, deferred back to you.
Yeah, so 3018 on that, there was no discussion on this within the Joint Appropriations Committee because we deal with the general fund side of the budget. And so this money flows through the general fund, then it flows into the SIPA. Then we have a sub-account in SIPA. Over the years, we've put money in there knowing that sometime out in the future, we're going to have to build. But there was no discussion on this because we were dealing with the general side fund of the side of the equation. So the idea that, so we did pass a bill out of here, Mr. President, where we repealed the SIPA account. And what the Senate did with that is we took that prison account and then we put that account up into the LSRA. So the money's still there. This was never discussed amongst the Joint Appropriations Committee. None at all. And so this comes as strictly as a House amendment. So it's nothing that we had ever contemplated. We primarily deal with the general fund side of the equation. This moved general fund stuff out of the SIPA prison account and shifts all that money and eliminates the prison account, puts it in the cool school capital. But I hope that answers, we'd never seen this until it showed up.
Okay, Senator Scott, you want to take care of the general observation?
Yeah, Mr. President, and I don't want to be critical of the committee, but I think we need for the future to redo this style of presentation somehow. I will say to them, I did not understand about 2/3 of their presentation at all. And I'm trying to think what could be done to improve it. I think one of the things, Mr. President, and I'm just thinking aloud on some of this, if the presentation sheets could also show in blocks that essentially correspond, one for the health department, one for the family service, that sort of thing. They show the House amendments, but they don't show the Senate amendments. That would be very useful, I think, in helping us to understand what the differences in thinking between the two houses were. That would be helpful. I kept frankly getting lost, Mr. President, as to which amendment, where are we talking about when, and just got lost in all this. And that's a matter of presentation. And remember, Mr. President, those of us out here don't have the specialized knowledge of the Appropriations Committee, and we can get lost in some of the shorthand with all the accounts, and they are very complicated. And that's a problem, I think, maybe relating to our whole account, how our whole budget accounting system and special accounts and all that sort of thing works. So, Mr. President, I don't have any really magic solutions, but for me, this exercise has not been very productive in understanding what's going on. And I think for the future, Mr. President, I hope we will rethink this and see how can we make it a more useful tool for those of us who are not intimately familiar with the budget.
Let's, before we go back to a member of the appropriations, let's go to Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, I don't know what Charlie's problem was. I followed it completely on the first line.
And just a reminder, don't use names. Thank you for the observation. Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, I share the consternation of my fellows at how difficult it is. And in fact, I've had a conversation with a member of staff and some of my fellow appropriations committee members that when we come down here next year, what we need to start with is what the final document looks like that comes out of conference committee that goes to the floor. Because when you're on appropriations, you're hell-bent to keep up with a lot of this stuff because you go through the budget and then you've got to get a different set of reports to understand all the discussion that you did. And then you got to get a different, you keep reorganizing these spreadsheets to shuffle around the information, try and make it comprehensible. And so, and I apologize for not distributing this on the floor earlier, but to me, I needed to see that right-hand column that says, how many dollars apart are we with the House? That's really what it comes down to on this stuff. And, then there's nuances like they take it out of the LISRA, we take it out of the SIP or the general fund, that kind of thing. That doesn't bother me. It's still just money. And so, but the rule says this third reading consideration is limited to a presentation by us of the House amendments, period. So in a way, I'm kind of violating the rule, giving you this much. So when we're done here, and I don't have the solution, I'm just telling you I'm looking for it. When we're done here, staff will then give us another spreadsheet, which is a concordance of here's everything the Senate proposed in agency order, here's everything the House proposed, and here's all the differences. To my way of thinking, that's what we should be looking at right now. But that's not what the rule says. The rule says all we do is explain the House amendments, period. And that's why we've got the spreadsheet. So, and unfortunately, we just adopted this rule for another 2 years. So, but we can probably exercise enough flexibility in the Senate that, and so bear that in mind when we come back out on the floor as we go through the budget process. If you see something that you say, this is what I would have liked to start with, let me know, because it'll help us in our deliberations too. Thank you, Mr. President.
It's a good point that dollar difference does help on the right-hand side. Okay, Chairman Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll see if I can kind of highlight and finish this off. Just a couple of observations. I mean, one of the reasons it gets so complicated when it shouldn't be is because the Wyoming legislature has some propensity to legislate in the budget bill. And so when you come to that third page and you've got all that stuff running around, those should be in separate bills. And that way we can come out, they're piecemeal, we can distribute, we can have the discussions they deserve instead of a second or third reading discussion we have during the budget. That's one of the reasons why you don't legislate in the budget bill. And the other reason that you don't legislate in the budget bills typically is our Constitution says the budget bill shall contain just general appropriation or appropriations. And we're not supposed to be about, you can start to put some conditions on those appropriations. But when you start to do other things other than appropriate with some conditions, you're potentially overstepping your constitutional authority. And quite frankly, this governor's been very good and has not been shy about lining out bills that are in the budget for that very reason. And so I think we have a tendency to do that. We did that over here. They did it over there. But that's when we stand up and urge you not to legislate in the budget bill, that's the reason why. A couple of other things that I would point out is, first of all, you're right. This is, when you look at budget processes across the country, there's a ranking about who's the simplest and most straightforward and who's are more complicated. And they rank those, and Wyoming doesn't fall in the ranking because it's kind of like, and then there's Wyoming. It is incredibly too complicated what we have. And so over the last several years, your Senate Appropriations Committee has been working to move things so that it's clear, so that we have trying to appropriate and move. So ultimately at the end, we would appropriate from the school foundation program and we would appropriate from the general fund. And that's how we would do it. And if there's not enough money in the school foundation program to pay for the obligations for educating our children, that we write a check from the general fund so everybody knows exactly how much that is. And so when and our good friends in the other end of the hall have a very different philosophy. They want to set this up so it all flows naturally, so that when it happens and you get their when you get the fund, and this year there's approximately, somewhere between $250 to $300 million deficit in the school foundation program. How do we cover that? So you have all these fund transfers from the House to try and cover that. In the Senate, we just as soon write a check from the general fund for whatever that number is to pay for it. And so we've been moving in that direction, but that's been one of the things we're trying to do. And the Senate, the Joint Appropriations has been trying to do for the last 4 or 5 years is continue to do that. And that leads to significant friction in philosophy with our friends down at the other end. And what they're doing is not necessarily wrong. And I wouldn't say that it's wrong. It's a different approach to solve that. But in my mind, it makes it more complicated than it has to be. And it's harder for us and harder, not if you think it's hard for us, think about the common citizen out there and how hard it is for them to understand what we're doing down here with our budget. But if we could get this back to where it was 2 accounts, the school foundation program, and try and work from that. And, and obviously there'll be some sub accounts. We have school capital construction and other things like that. But in my mind, we're trying to get to that point. And unfortunately, we that's a difference in philosophy. And so we end up with this continued effort to move these funds around and these permanent accounts to try and take care of the problems in a different way. I think I also, in talking with our clerk, Mr. President, I wanted to apologize for people online. We went back and looked about how you announce online with respect to when we do this, when we do HB1 and the other end does Senate File 1. And we went back and looked, we haven't noticed this online or in our announcements or our reports in the past. And it wasn't. And so when we went to do it today and we started talking about it yesterday, there wasn't a way to do it, but we'll get that fixed next year with IT so people will know when we're going to do this out there who are watching and listening. With that, there's a couple other things, Mr. Chairman, if I can wrap this up. Let me provide for you some differences in the amendment and some overall differences with the House. The House adopted 24 budget amendments. The Senate adopted 16, inclusive of a separately voted divided amendment. So the difference is the House adopted essentially 8 more net amendments than the Senate did. In the general fund, the House spent $16.9 million of general fund money. The Senate reduced general fund appropriation by $1.15 million. So the difference between what the House spent of the general fund and what the Senate spent on the general fund is $18 million. Of the LSRA, setting aside and not dealing with the budget balancers, which we do to make sure we have a balanced budget, neither chamber uses the balanced budget, the LSR really to balance their budgets. However, the House appropriated $28.4 million directly from the LSRA, and the Senate appropriated $11.4 million from the LSRA, which is our rainy day fund. The difference is $17 million, roughly. Of the SIPA, the Strategic Investments and Projects account, the House appropriated $4 million from the Senate, Senate $4 million from the SIPA account, while the Senate reduced appropriation from SIPA by $9.47 million and required further action of the legislature on $10.7 million of projects funded in the school capital construction account. So the difference with what we did on SIPA is $13.5 million. And talking to our friends down the hall, they had a specific goal to drain the SIPA account, which is neither bad nor good. The SIPA ultimately is a sub-account of the general fund. It's money that comes out of the general fund and goes over into this other account. So in some respects, it's all general fund money. But that was the difference with respect to the SIPA account. With the school construction capital account, the House added $30.5 million. We just talked about that. That was the transfer from the penitentiary reserve account that we were putting aside money for one of these days when we have to build or do a substantial renovation to a new correctional facility. The House added $30.5 million in a revenue transfer from that, and the Senate reduced projects from the school capital construction account by $10.7 million. So there's about a $10.7 million difference in spending out of the school capital construction account. And quite frankly, most of that are 2 projects. There's a project in Ten Sleep and a project in Riverton. And then also just getting to the capital account, the school capital construction account, back to at least a 0 balance instead of a negative balance. In terms of the 1% severance tax account, there's 1% of severance that has been used over the years largely to contribute to these permanent funds and increase the corpus or the principal of those permanent funds. And the House deposits revenue of the 1% severance tax, which has not been appropriated this year. They've put 50% of that in the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund reserve account, and they've put half of that in the Common School Permanent Land Fund reserve account. And again, my conversations with the folks down the hall, as their intent was, they think their object is even if raising it to 225, they want to fill those up so that once there's enough in though, and there is $1 billion right now of unrealized capital gains in the state's portfolio that may or may not be realized depending on what happens, just like the good majority floor leader talked about earlier. And so the Senate simply did it differently and deposited one half of that into the corpus of each of those funds instead of in the reserve accounts. So that's the difference in the 1% severance tax account. The House added 13 full-time equivalent positions, and the Senate added 3 full-time equivalent personnel, and which is a difference of about 10. So that gives you an idea as you go through the different major funds that we have. And so that's the effect of the budget bill. Now, if you're not geeked out yet, I want you to, I think we have these now. And this is now, so put all the ties, stand up, take a deep breath. We're changing the subject quite a bit. We're still talking about money, still talking about budgets, but we're not talking just about the budget bill anymore. We're talking about the fiscal profile. And this is kind of, many of you, this is going to be your first shot at this. There's a lot of you haven't seen one of these for a year. We haven't talked about it much because you kind of need to see what clears committee the whole to kind of know where you are fiscally as this moves forward. So this now, as we rapidly approach crossover, this now starts to become relevant and help you monitor what it is. So I'm going to just give you a couple of highlights off this of numbers I think you want to watch for to help understand this, the golden rod, often to return to the golden rod. So if you look, you see the very top of the first page, you see the general fund. If you want to see what's going on there, you'll notice that you have what it was when we finished the Craig status of the January Craig, and also the recommendations that came out of the final budget bill. Then the next one is you see the effect of what they did and what they're doing in the House on their budget bill and other legislation that has appropriations. And then you see in the final and third column what the Senate is doing with the Senate budget as it's been adopted, plus other bills that have appropriations that have at least made it through committee of the whole. And so you can see there that there's a difference. If you go to line 16, you can see right now the difference of the general fund right there is on this sheet overall is about 10 million. The House has on the total appropriations on line 16. See the Senate's 2,547,000,000 and change, and the Senate is, the House is, and then the Senate is the next column, 2,529,000,000 and change. And there's, like, as you can see, there's roughly about a $20 million difference there. Not quite, about 18, I guess. The next, the budget reserve account. Again, that one, we always want that to be roughly 5% of the budget of the general fund appropriations. And so that's a budget balance uses that. So there's really no differences there. See the LSR reserve account, and you see the differences there. If the appropriations on line 28, you see the difference between what the recommendation was as we left the Senate, and then you see what we did. That's mostly reflected. Some of it's in appropriation bills and some of it's in the budget bill. There's about a 17 million difference there between the House and the Senate. You see the school foundation program reserve account. It really has no action there. Then you see the school foundation program, and you'll see the number to look at there where you see the differences, and again, is appropriations. And that's in large part to the fund transfers we've talked about, where they're trying to cover and also look to trying to resolve and put money in there so it's ready to be expended in the future biennium. And again, the Senate hasn't done that. We've just as soon write the check out of the general fund so everybody knows what that number is. A school capital construction account. There you can see there's about 11 million. We've talked about that. That's essentially all of it is due to the spending, the budget bill, our differences in the budget bill. And then you see these reserve accounts. You see that there's no difference in the PMTF reserve account really, but I guess there is. Again, that's the difference is those transfers in the reserve we just talked about, and they're filling those up with the common school with the 1% severance tax money, and the Senate's not doing that, trying to put it into corpus. So that's the differences between those spending policy reserve accounts. And you see that just in the total balance available. You can see the differences there. Turning the page on the next one, this is just additional detail on the general fund. And I want you to just look at lines 27 through 43. If you want to see the effect of bills as they move through, you see the 2020 budget bill, which was passed a year ago. Then you see the new 21, the budget bills that we just talked about. You can see the differences there. Then you see some management council, some reversions that come because of some things they're done. they've done. You see what the net effect of the last budget session was. And then we have this general session, and then you see House Bill 17, House Bill 67, House Bill 35, Senate File 30, Senate File 122, and other bills. And those are the appropriations that are listed inside those bills. And that's how you know if they're tapping the general fund and what the effect that those bills have on the general fund. So it helps you monitor all the general fund spending on that page. Flipping over to the next page, if again, I think I'd point out, again, there's some additional detail on the budget reserve account. And also we get down to the legislation, the LSRA, the Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account. Again, what you see there, the differences you see there, if you go to line 38, again, you see it's because we transfer and do different things with these transfers out of the 1% severance tax account. That's the differences there. And then you also see appropriations that are directly affecting or trying to directly appropriate from the LSRA. You see the list of bills there. And so that's another way to keep track of. Not all the money comes out of the general fund. So it comes from various areas, and that's how one of the ways that you can help know what's going on with these bills as they're moving through the bodies. Strategic projects investment account, again, you'll see the difference. If you look at total balance available, that's just been a difference in philosophy of where you're spending from. The Senate was not trying to drain SIPA account, and the House has had the intentional effort to spend money out of the SIPA account and draw it to zero. And SIPA accounts are intended to be investments in one-time projects. There's nothing right or wrong about it. It's a different way to get to some results. And so, but that's what we're doing there. You see the school foundation program reserve account. I don't think there's any particular differences there. Then we get over to the second to last page on page 5. You see the spending. You see again these reserve accounts with more detail for the permanent mental trust fund, and then the CSPLF is the common school permanent land fund. And again, the differences there are where you transferred that money. The Senate was putting in directly into the corpus. This puts it into the reserve accounts. The object is one, you might need it later on is their philosophy. And two, if you fill those up, if there's capital gains realized, you could have a significant spillover into the corpus in a different way. And so that's what you have on that page. Basically, same types of things, and the differences are those transfers of funds. And on the last page, you just see other is mostly where you find the water development funds. And really the only differences you see in those is the one house recommendation that they fund the other half of some staff members out of water development one account and take them off the general fund, and the Senate didn't do that. So that's about the only differences that we see there. But you can see again on the overall spending, if you go to line 21, you see that there's the omnibus water bill construction and Senate File 37, the omnibus water bill planning. You can see the appropriations and other bills that are trying to appropriate from water account 1 there. If you drop down to water account 2, same thing. Whether they're doing from water development account 1 or 2, and then down to water development account 3, and you see there's no real effect. I don't think there's anything yet that seems to have affected water development account 3 that's pending before the Senate, but stay tuned, that can always change. So this is when you can start to look at these things and see where the money's being spent and from where it is being spent as these bills pass through. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think that's the end of it. And thank you. We appreciate the criticisms. We can always do better. We have a little bit of, like I say, some of our hands are tied a little bit by some of the rules that we have, but we're always available, and we always look for an opportunity to provide more information. And I'm a geek about this stuff. I've always been a geek about this stuff. And so, and when you live with this, it becomes second nature. And so we all have a tendency to do that when we're involved in those areas. And so we use acronyms and we use other things, and we go fast because we've been living with it for 3 or 4 months now. And the rest of you are just getting it from a fire hose. So we apologize for that, but appreciate the effort, and we'll try and improve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Kinski, Mr. Chairman, go ahead, Senator Kinski.
Mr. President, thank you. Just a couple of follow-up items, and one is a bit of history that our friend from Bates Creek is familiar with. The mirror budget process, which really does, we need to revisit that. But originally it started out where the large budget items were consolidated into one big omnibus budget. So you had CapCon in there, and you had schools in there, and you had local government in there. And I think it was my first year in the legislature, a legislator asked for an attorney general opinion because the Constitution says every bill can only have one subject except a general appropriations bill for the operation of state government. And that lists some specific things, and many more things than that were being loaded into the budget bill. So we went from a single, very large budget bill to where now you've got multiple budget bills, and not all of them, and only the general operations budget is on this mirror budget bill process. So recall, we separately considered in January local government funding. There was a time when that was part of the mirror budget bill process. The multiple accounts, that's a discussion that is worth ongoing. But remember, if you hearken back to again, that the discussion on the day of the general local government funding bill, we rolled out this January 2021 Craig long-term revenue forecast, if you'll recall. And that this does effectively look past all these different statutory buckets and does what our chairman talked about, having just simply your savings accounts and your checking accounts. So if you refer back to that, and unfortunately preparation of this is complicated enough that we're not going to get it very often through the budget process, but it shows starting out what we have in the bank account. Then it shows our estimated revenues for general fund, schools. Then it shows our estimated appropriations for general fund and schools. And then it shows your deficit or surplus. It's a deficit. And then it shows what you're left with at the end of the biennium, and it goes out a couple bienniums. And there's a lot of assumptions that go into it, but this looks past all of the confusion that attends. Are we moving the walnut with the ball under it this way with the shell or that way with the shell? And so we're trying to move towards transparency, and that SIPA bill, to get rid of the SIPA, is just the beginning of that, to get something much simpler. And it's so you heard reference on the floor to a past Senate president said, don't trust the Appropriations Committee. They know too much. Really extended from an era where that really was true, that the average legislator really had little chance, not the kind of data that you have now. To quote my friend from Teton County, he says, I can't imitate his voice, but I'm working on it. But he says, I get how it works. There's no money for anything I want unless you really understand where all the coffee cans are. And then somehow the money seems to be able to be there. And we're trying to move past that to where everybody, all 30 senators, all 60 House members have a clear idea of what's in the budget or not. And then finally, I want to tell you this, share this one story with you about the budget and the complexity of it. I told Don Richards when I first got on Appropriations Committee, I said, I despair of ever building the kind of expertise that you see some of these guys have, whether it was John Schiffer, Tom Kinnison, Senator Perkins. I despair of ever being able to get to that level of proficiency. Isn't there just like a little book I can read? I could study it over the weekend and get some 3x5 flashcards like I'm cramming for a final exam. And Don looked at me and he said, it's just seat time. It's just seat time. He said, guys like Schiffer, Kinnison, they each have hundreds of hours sitting in that Appropriations Committee room, going through those budgets over and over again, year after year. This is knowledge just put on a layer at a time. And I said, Don, that is quite possibly the most depressing thing anybody has ever said to me in the course of my legislative career. But we are trying to get as much information to you as you can so you can participate as meaningfully as possible in the process. And we will continue to refine how we get this information out to you in as easily digestible a form as possible. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion? Senator Driscoll.
President, I move we stand recessed till 2 p.m.
Senator Driscoll, maybe we want to close this out
Oh, I'm
first.
sorry.
Yeah, let's do that. So just ensuring that there is no further discussion. There being no further discussion on House Bill 1, in accordance with Joint Rule 14.1G and Joint Rule 14.1H, House Bill 1 is referred directly to a conference committee of 5 members from each house to meet to resolve the differences between the houses with respect to both budget bills, Senate File 1 and House Bill 1. House Bill 1 Joint Conference Committee will consist of Senators Perkins, Hicks, Kinsky, Steinmetz, and Garuz. Senator Perkins, Chair. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we stand recessed till 2 p.m.
You've heard the motion. Let me just make sure. Any announcements? Any announcements? No. Oh, Senator Anderson, you have one.
Mr. President, your Minerals Committee number 9 will meet today, 15 minutes from recess, so about 10 till 1 in Capital Extension W4. We'll hear Senate File 141 for sure, Senator Perkins. And we'll also hear House Bill 10, COVID-19 Large Business Relief Program, House Bill 69, Division of Banking Fees, but we may be limited on time. So Senate File 141 for sure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Chairman. Let's make sure. Are there any other announcements? Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Transportation Committee will meet Monday upon adjournment to take up House Bill 21, Wyoming National Guard Preference for Education, House Bill 17 engrossed, range management at military training areas, and House Bill 22 engrossed, Wyoming Military Code. That'll be in W2 down below upon adjournment Monday.
Thank you. Monday noted. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee, the Perfect 10, will meet Monday morning at 8 o'clock to hear House Bill 109, Local Health Officers Education Requirements.
Thank you. Senator Perkins, do you have an announcement?
Yes, Mr. President, your committee number 2 appropriations will meet on 15 minutes or 10 minutes after the noon recess in room 301 to take up consideration of Senate File 121 and also House Bill 87. And I'm not sure if we have a re-referral, but if we have a re-referral, then we will take up any re-referrals as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Further announcements. Hear the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Senate will stand recessed until 2 p.m., 2 o'clock.